Well, hello and welcome back to class. Today we are going to oh no, you don't have to do that. But thank you. But thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Ethel. So today we are going to talk about a very important topic, and that's design principles. And we're going to address how best to create things like PowerPoints in your classroom so that they help you to communicate the content and do not take away from student understanding and student learning. All right, so the thing that we need to jump into and understand is that design aids communication. Design aids communication. We do not want to do anything that is going to interrupt that free flowing of ideas between you, the teacher, and your students. And sometimes we do that, and we do that unconsciously, and we do that sometimes by really power packing, we think, our PowerPoints. Whereas really the power in PowerPoints is that you use a lot of visual support and that you use text to support the visual and not too much text. All right, so we are going to talk about what makes good design. Well, the first thing is clarity. We need to make sure that it is easy to understand. The next thing is simplicity. Simplicity. Does it contain distracting elements, or is it simply put together so that students can easily understand the visual that you're using to support your instruction? The next one, number 3, is humanity. Are you taking into consideration your students when you are creating a PowerPoint to go along with your lesson? And you should definitely think about developmental issues with your students. So making sure that you are creating something that's going to meet the needs of your students. Take your audience into consideration. And the next thing is brevity. Do not put so much information on a slide that your students are overwhelmed with the information and you actually lose them in your teaching because there's just too much that's going on the screen that they're not paying any attention to your teaching. So those 4 elements we need to think about, teachers: clarity, simplicity, humanity, and brevity when we're putting together a presentation for instruction. All right, so if we look at this, then you will see that this is from the United States Department of Transportation, and they have created, and a lot of research went into this, and they have created a sign. So let's see, little Ricky, do you see any of the 4 elements here that we talked about, the design principles? Okay, well, it wasn't about animals. We did talk about humanity, taking your audience into consideration, but not animals. Oh, because you see the word buffalo here, you think that the Department of Transportation was directing you to animals, maybe a zoo? Oh, you have a joke? You want to tell us a joke? Okay, go ahead. What time is it when a buffalo sits on a canoe? I have no idea. Oh, time to get another canoe. I see. Okay, little Ricky, I think you're having a little trouble today, and I've got something here. It's called Vitamin. I'd like for you to take a little bit of this, and it might help you today with, being more on the job as we're learning about design principles. Thank you. All right, Lucy, so could you give me one of the design principles? Simplicity. Thank you. That's exactly right. It's a simple design. And it is taking humanity into consideration because it's just putting down the name of the city and the number of miles to get there. So that is taking in the design principles. Now, if we were to go into another country and we were to see something like this, can you see if it is taking in any of the design principles? Oh, Ethel? Oh, you don't think that it's you don't think that it has a lot of clarity? Well, it doesn't have clarity to us as an American going in, although I will say that it did take in some humanity because it has signs in different languages. There's signs here that some are in English and some are in another language. I believe that might be French or maybe Italian. I'm not sure. I barely speak English, so I'm not sure. But it does take some humanity into consideration here. But you're right. There's not a lot of clarity. It's not real simple because there's a lot of signs put together here on this. So that is something that we would recognize if we were traveling and we saw this. So if I worked for the Department of Transportation, then I see this sign and I know it means wrong way, but if I was to look at this sign, I might say, I don't really like red. Red's not my color. And I don't really like this font. I mean, look at it. It's in all caps and it's block lettering, and I don't really like that. I think that if I worked for the Department of Transportation, I might change this sign to be something like this. Oh, look at that fancy font. And look at purple. Purple's my favorite color. I love it. So, but does this sign give you the same feeling when you see it, the same emotion? Does it take into consideration our importance for clarity and humanity when I would see this sign? No, it doesn't. It gives you a completely different feeling. In fact, it's kind of like, oh, here we are. We're at wrong way. And also let me say that students in your classroom, especially those like I have issue with vision, this would be very difficult for them to read. So you would want to be very careful with using fancy fonts in your classroom. In fact, I would encourage you to pick a font and stay with that font. And a serif font, S-E-R-I-F, would probably be the best when you're creating something like this for your classroom. All right, so for presentations, it's very important that when you are putting up some sort of a presentation, make sure that what you are putting on the board makes sense. If you only put percentages and you didn't anchor them on some other information, then it might be confusing for your students. So you should always make sure that you are anchoring your information when you are teaching, so that the students know, 69% of the people surveyed say that they do not like it when their teacher just reads them the slides. And the way that you can get away from that is don't put so much text on your slide, because by very nature, when we're teaching, we tend to default to reading what's on the board, rather than us using a visual to support us as we do that important job of teaching. Another part of the survey that Dave Perotti did is that 48% of the people surveyed said that they do not like it when very small, teeny tiny text is used. And I will tell you, teachers, that if you use tiny little text on your slides, your students are going to spend their attention in trying to figure out what is written on the slide, and they will completely tune you out. So if you're talking and you've got a lot of text on your slide, guess who's going to lose? You are going to lose every time. They're going to pay more attention to the visual here. Also, 48% said that they do not like to see full sentences all over a slide. Bulleted phrases are the best because it gets down to the meat of what you're teaching, and you've got it in a very short statement, and that will help your learners to understand what it is that you're teaching them. It will help support your teaching. All right, so when you are using both text and graphics, you are creating a very powerful way of communicating content and skills. When you marry the two, as long as you don't marry a lot of text and a lot of graphics, make it very simplistic. What is a flower? Well, in this case, we might have an idea of a flower looks like this. So we have the word, we have the text, and then we have the image, the visual to go along with it. And it's very powerful also if there's kind of a twist and Flower becomes the pig in the story who's named Flower. So you are making sure that there is clarity, that your students understand, oh, well, this is a character in a story named Flower. And there's the picture of the pig that goes along with it. So the whole idea is that we do not want to reduce understanding. We do not. So if we give our students way too much text on a screen, if it's too busy going on, and then we're trying to teach, guess what? We are going to create cognitive dissonance from the audio and the visual together, and it's going to make our students just, they won't know what to do because they're being overloaded. There's too much going on, so that's going to create cognitive dissonance in our students, so you don't want to do that. Don't put so much text, don't put so many visuals, and then don't try to talk over all of that going on, because I promise you, teachers, you're going to lose out. The students are going to pay attention to the visual over you. All right, so, normal people just create a to-do list. Well, Ethel, I've created, what does this say? A to-don't list. That's right, this is a to-don't list. So, do not read slides. Do not read slides. That is not teaching. That's reading. And hopefully our students can read. So we need to make sure that we're giving them the good stuff and that the text that's on our slides are going to support our teaching. Don't use full sentences. Just use maybe terms or bulleted phrases when you're creating a PowerPoint. And here's my caveat on that, teacher friends. When you are, if you have something like, if I had a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., and I wanted my students to read it, and I knew it was in the next slide of my PowerPoint, that I might say something like this. Hey guys, I've got this great quote from Martin Luther King Jr. that's coming up on the next slide. I'm going to step out of the way, and I want you all to read it. And after you've read it, we're going to talk about it. So I have set it up. I've told my students the procedure of what I'm doing, and I'm going to put the phrase up, and I'm going to step out of the way. And I'm going to let my students have the time to read. And then I can come back in, and I can talk about it. And I might even use any tools that I have on my devices, maybe to highlight or circle and emphasize the text that's there. Okay, so we have the to-don't list of do not read slides, do not use full sentences, do not use super busy backgrounds. Now, I have seen teachers who are trying to teach a lesson, and they have come across some sort of a GIF that they add to their PowerPoint, maybe like a bunny hopping along the top of the page. I love it. What's more entertaining than a bunny hopping at the top of the page? But the students are going to watch the bunny. They're not going to watch you. They're not going to be attentive to the tasks that you are working so hard to teach them. So do not make things distracting on your slides. Also, don't use too many decorative graphics because remember that the power in PowerPoint is that you're marrying the text with the visual. And if you overload the visual, we're back to that idea of the cognitive dissonance. And you do not want to create cognitive dissonance in your learners with these things. So this is our to-don't list. So remember the rule of 4. The rule of 4 when you are creating a PowerPoint. There should be around 4 items on the page. So you don't want to overload, and that means like a stream of text, 4 different maybe bulleted phrases, maybe 4 different blocks. Maybe it's organized with 4 different squares or blocks, text boxes on there, and you've got a little bit in each one. Maybe images, those 4 images. Or maybe a map, maybe like a battle. A map of Lexington, the Battle of Lexington Concord, and then you've got maybe 3 lines of bulleted phrases that go along with that. So you've got 4 things on the page. So you do not want to overload as you are teaching. All right, so here's your to-do list. You were waiting for it. I know you were waiting for it. You do want to use bullet points. You do want to limit the number of fonts. Like I said at the beginning, you don't want to overload on the fonts. Don't use the fancy fonts. Use the basic fonts that will help your students understand. The students that are at the back of the room or the students who may have some sort of a visual issue, so that you want it to be very clear in your presentation so that they can read it. If it's worth putting on a screen, it's worth having your students be able to read it. All right, the next thing is show and tell. PowerPoint is powerful with the ability to show and tell. Put up a picture for your launch activity, for your activating strategy. You may want to have something that's being presented on the screen when your students enter the classroom. And maybe you would just have a question so that they need to, when they sit down, to look at that and to try to answer the question that you have that goes along with the visual that's on there. So do show and tell. So if I was teaching let's say or maybe an American history class, and my students would walk in and I would have maybe a political cartoon that would be presented on the board that would go along with the period in American history that we are studying, and then I would have a question for my students to be able to unpack what is going on in this political cartoon. Well, then that would be a good way to show and tell. All right, and also use simple backgrounds. Now you'll notice that in this PowerPoint that I'm using today, all I'm using are very simple. I have a blue top, a blue band at the top, and then I'm using white text on the blue band, and I've got a white background using black dark text. So here's the rule on creating an effective PowerPoint presentation based on the lighting in your classroom. Okay, teacher friends, if you're teaching in a classroom that is dark, maybe you're in the inside of a school and you don't have a lot of natural light. All you have is fluorescent lights, and you don't want to use too much of those. It's sometimes it can cause headaches in your students. Sometimes it's difficult for them to actually do writing on papers with the fluorescence. So maybe you don't want to have all of the lights going at once. So if you're in a darker room, then you want to use a dark background and bright white text. And that's going to make your presentation pop so that your students will be able to easily see the information that you're presenting. Now, I'm in a very bright room here, and it's very sunny in Georgia, and I've got a lot of natural light coming in. And so I have created a PowerPoint that has a light background with dark text, and that's going to make it pop to where my students can easily see what it is that I'm teaching them. So remember that there's, I call it the Steve Jobs, who has now passed away, of course, but if you remember back, I'm old. If you remember back, whenever there would be something new that would be rolled out from Apple, then he would always be in a very dark room. He would be on stage. He would even dress with dark clothing, and then behind him, the screen would always be dark with bright white, and it would just pop where you could easily see it and easily read it. And of course, he knows his design principles. He never put too much on a screen. All right, so remember, context is the key. You want to remember and think about how the design is going to be used. And I always like to think about it with the opera principle. So when you go to the opera, you will see that there is always some sort of a star. Maybe it's a diva, and that is the person that is the main attention getter. That's the one that's getting a lot of the attention. And so that's the star. So think about that on your page that you are creating. Who's the star? And also think about who's the co-star. And so that would be, so the star would be the thing that your eyes are immediately drawn to. The co-star is, of course, the supporting star. The one who doesn't have as many songs or as many lines, but is still supporting and has some lines and songs also, but is not the star, not the diva. And also you want to know who's in the chorus, who's the supporting cast. So you should be able to recognize all of these things when you are creating in PowerPoint. So here's an example of a PowerPoint screen or a slide that you might use if you were teaching a class in geography. And so you would see there's text at the top on the prime meridian. There's like a little paragraph there. There's a visual of the planet. There's some arrows with some text that goes along with describing what's going on. And then there's a paragraph of text here. There's a big paragraph of text at the bottom, and there's a clock over here. So that's a lot going on. If you were to look at this, I would like for Ricky to tell me, who's the star of this slide? Who's the star? Well, I know you're a star and you're not up here. But on this slide here, who's the star? The globe, exactly right. That's where your eyes are immediately drawn, is the globe. And so that would be who we would say is the diva or the star. If you look more, you might say, well, who's the co-star? And I would probably have to say these blocks of text that are kind of making an archway around that. That would be the co-star. And then we have a lot of supporting cast here, don't we? We have lots of chorus. This is too busy to teach from. And remember what I said, if you put a lot of text on your slide, you're going to end up defaulting to just reading the text. And our students can read, so they need to get good information from us. So we might do something else. We might have something like this that we would use. So it's got the star here, the planet. It's got the information. We're talking about dividing up into different hemispheres. We're talking about the prime meridian, a line of longitude going from pole to pole. And then we're talking about the different hemispheres. And there's some information here at the top to help explain what's going on with this visual. But we took away a lot of the other, we enlarged the image that we really want our students to pay attention to and to understand. And then this gives us the opportunity to teach and to talk about what it is that we're wanting to teach our students. Okay? All right. Remember that limitations are good. Limit long lines of text, limit the number of fonts. I can't say that enough. Limit your color palette. Don't use a lot of colors. I know we love colors and colors are fun, but we don't want to overuse colors so that it's distracting. Also, remember your page elements. You need to carefully group things together. You need to align how you're going to group those. Don't have some that are center aligned and some that are left justified, some that are right justified. Try to make it organized so that it understands. That it comes across with understanding. Also, don't worry about white space. Sometimes we're very scared of putting white space up and we think we got to fill this up, but we don't have to. We do not have to. Also, avoid using centered text. So on my slide here, if I had had everything just kind of centered in the middle, then it's more difficult for organization and for the eye to focus in when there's uneven endings of the breaks on the ends of the lines. You want it to be much more organized, so avoid centering it. Avoid using all caps, and especially teachers, because we are modeling to our students appropriate writing and correct writing and grammar. So avoid using all caps. Also, avoid using italics in all of your slides because we want to make sure that our students can read, and many times using italics is a lot like using a fancy font. We don't want our students to go the wrong way. We want them, like my sign that I would create, we want them to be able to read what's on our presentation. So these don't just go with PowerPoints. It's whatever you're creating for your class, whether it is creating a web page, whether it is creating a newsletter, whatever you're creating, don't put so much information in that it's difficult to really read. I mean, if this was a newsletter that came home, this font is so small that it would be difficult to read. So we wouldn't want to do that. We would want to make things that would be easier to read and also that would assist our audience, whoever's going to read it, with having met their humanity and their and hitting the clarity and brevity and simplicity that are part of those design principles. So no matter what you are creating, you want to make sure that you are doing that. All right, so that's design principles. I'm so glad that all of you were in class today, and I hope that you can take this and you can use this when you're creating presentations for your classroom. Remember that you want to make sure that whatever you create to use while you're teaching is going to help you to communicate the content and skills that you've been tasked to teach. So thanks so much. Have a good day. I would like to see you, little Ricky, after class. Thank you.